hello again, Grace Group member. We have begun a new sermon series on the Gospels, and today we talked about the Gospel of Matthew, and Jesus is King. Was kind of what I was heading at, and your responsibility and mine to tell everybody that the King has come and that he is alive, and you can be part of his kingdom. So that's my synopsis. What's yours, or what did the Spirit speak to you about that maybe we can go into a little deeper now?
Well, you mentioned two things. One at the beginning of your sermon, which stood out to me, and then one at the end of the sermon that stood out to me. And it was that point I realized why both stood out, and I made the link between them, or the Lord helped me make the link between them. At the beginning of the sermon, you spoke about the fate of John the Baptist, and he was in prison, undergoing trials, and after everything he'd seen, everything he'd witnessed, he asked Jesus, "Are you the Messiah, or should we wait for another?" There was that moment of lack of faith. And if we look at the end of the sermon, where you spoke about, for example, the Pharisees and the people in Jerusalem, demanding a sign, demanding a sign, demanding a sign. It's like whatever Jesus gave them in terms of proof. I mean, there were the 5 testimonies he gave. The signs, the miracles, the lame walking, the blind seeing, people raised from the dead. And yet they still wouldn't believe. It was a case of they didn't want to give up their earthly passions. In the case of the Pharisees, they didn't want to give up the people following them and what they perceived to be worshipping them. You know, there was a hardness of heart there, which is basically saying, I'm not going to accept this gospel, no matter what you say to me, no matter what you give to me. I'm just going to give reason after reason, not to prove to you that I don't believe you, but to try and prove to myself that I shouldn't. And we look at John, and it's the opposite end of the spectrum. It's just a lack of faith, but the difference being that lack of faith reached out to the one whom faith came from and said, I'm having a doubt. Can you help me with it?
Yeah, help my unbelief.
Yeah, I mean, we know from the Old Testament that the Lord examines the heart, not the outward appearance. So you compare the stone-cold heart of the Pharisees and those that just wouldn't believe to the tender heart of John that was simply saying, I'm having trouble. Please help me with my faith. That's what God wants from us. He wants us to reach out to him when we don't have faith, when we don't believe in something, or we're having trouble believing in something. You know, we look at the example of the fig tree, and it says in one of the Gospels, don't remember which one, that it was not the season for figs when Jesus went to the tree, so he should not expect it to have figs, and yet he cursed it for not producing fruit. And in the book of, I think it's either Jeremiah or Isaiah, I can't remember which, it talks about the Lord wanting Israel to be a fig tree that produces fruit out of season. And that's what he expects from us. He expects us to produce fruit in all seasons.
Yeah, be instant, in season, and out of season.
Yeah.
He literally said that in the New Testament. As you were describing the different kinds of doubts there, the doubts of John the Baptist and then the doubts of the Pharisees and that group, the two words that came to my mind were wouldn't and couldn't.
Yes.
So when someone says, I won't, well, then faith is impossible.
Yeah.
When someone says, I can't, please help me, that's the definition of faith. So sinking in the sea, Peter did, and Jesus said, why did you doubt? But look at Peter saying, Lord, save me.
Yes.
So it's God's incredible grace that even in Peter's doubt, we see how to trust God.
Yes.
We see how to call out to him for help, just as John the Baptist did. He didn't say, you're not the one, and I'm not following you anymore.
Mm-hmm.
He said, are you the one? Yes. I don't feel the certainty that I felt before, and I'm not saying he never had any doubts before. When Jesus came to be baptized, he said, why would I baptize you? You should baptize me. Well, that means he didn't fully understand everything of who Jesus was and what Jesus was doing if he's going to basically kind of correct him in a sort of kind of way. So he didn't have a full view of everything at all times.
Like Peter.
But like Peter. and like us.
Yes.
So, are you a person who struggles with doubts? Okay. Do you want to believe, or are you saying, I'm not going to? It wouldn't matter what happens. So God will not conquer the I won't guy.
Yeah.
He just lets him go on his way. Well, there's much to talk about there. If you've been reading from the Gospel of Matthew, especially between the sermon and this grace group time, then talk about the things that you have found in the book. It's a very rich book with much rich content. I don't know if I said it in my sermon or not, but there are scholars who say it is the greatest book ever written. Mm-hmm. So, the Bible's the greatest book ever written, but the Gospel of Matthew is the greatest book ever written. So that's quite a statement.
Yes,
so, dig deeper in the Gospel of Matthew.